I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theater scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theater scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theater creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you want to support the work that I do on Stageworthy, you can do that by leaving a tip, either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Your support helps me cover the cost of making this show, helps expand the show, and more. You can find a link to the digital tip jar in the show notes, which you can find on your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. This week on the podcast, my guest is Indrit Kasapi. Indrit is a producer, actor, dancer, and creator based in Toronto. He's the founding artistic producer for lemonTree Creations, as well as the artistic producer at Theatre Passe Muraille. In this episode, we talked about how lemonTree Creations first resisted and then embraced being known as a queer company, decolonial rehearsal processes, and exploring new ways to engage audiences through focusing on the audience experience. Here's our conversation. Could you, if you were to describe for somebody your artistic practice, or describe yourself as an artist, how would you do that?
That's such a tough question. I'd say I'm a performer, artist, writer, director, producer. I always say that I'm an artist who works a lot, like in theater, live performance with movement and text.
Nice.
Such a general way to say that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you work in that performance and you work with movement and text. That can be so many things, right? So
it's a good way to put it, because I mean, it does cover a lot of bases.
Exactly.
I always find it interesting, people's hyphenates, like how they describe themselves, because I think in the entire time that I've been doing this podcast, which is about 6 years now, I think I've spoken to 2 people who describe themselves as one thing.
Right.
And that's such a rare thing in the theater world, in the theater, I guess world is the right term, just in terms of how we operate today. When I was in theater school, they told us only do one thing, and this was a long time ago because I'm an old man. And they made it very clear you should never admit to doing anything other than acting, and that was the thing they told us.
Otherwise, it's failure. Yeah.
But nothing could be further from what is necessary now. That said, could you, I know I want to get to Theatre Passe Muraille, but first I want to talk about lemonTree Creations, because that is, I like to the things that I don't know about are the ones that are most fascinating to me, and I have not yet heard of lemonTree Creations, so I would love to learn about that. Could you describe for me lemonTree Creations?
Yeah, lemonTree is I always say it's a collective of artists. It's a project-based organization. It's been around since 2008. It started off because I needed a name to put on my application to SummerWorks, and I was like, oh God, what am I going to call this thing? It was not really like a thing that I didn't really think it was going to be something that was going to, go on for as long as it did. And I grew up back home in Albania, and we had a lemon tree in front of my house, and my bedroom looked at this tree. So I thought, that's kind of like poetic, I didn't think it was going to stick. So I just thought, I'll just call it lemonTree. And, sort of spiraled that way. I was at the time working with Jonathan Sainin on my first play that I ever wrote called The Red Devil. And, Jonathan and I started taking a lot more interest in queer theater, and then at that point, Cole Alvis came on board, and then it sort of materialized in this very organic, authentic way, and Cole and I really bonded over, theater and queer theater specifically. And at some point, it felt like, when we first were in existence, we were resisting the word queer. We were like, we don't want to be queer, we don't want to. In a way, we saw that as a way to limit ourselves, but it didn't matter what we saw ourselves as because the community started calling us the queer theater company. And so eventually at some point we embraced it. We're like, we are a queer theater company. That's what we're doing,
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
not kid ourselves here. So let's just, embrace it. Let's just, let's actually take it on. And then it has become this thing now that's very intentionally a project-based queer collective of artists that come together and produce theater. Once we take like long periods of time to develop work, and we are definitely project based, so that if we want to fold at any time, we can.
Now I want to come back to the way that you work, the way that you create work, because I find that a fascinating topic. But I will say, how many theater companies found their name because of the desperation to get something submitted for Fringe or Summer Works or
Oh
something
God,
like that? So many companies are like, well, I guess that's our name now.
somebody needs to write a book about that. That's for sure.
For
Yeah.
sure, yeah. Now, just let's dive into the way that the lemonTree Creations works. Like, do you have a particular way that you develop the work that you put out, that you do, or is it specific to each project? How do you do the process of creating a new work?
Yeah, I mean, it has evolved and it keeps evolving. I think where we're at right now is that we are very interested in decolonial ways of being in a rehearsal and in creation. And so we investigate that on a regular basis. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean to decolonize? Um, and we have those conversations on a regular basis. And whether it's, how is the room run? Who is in the room? How does the sort of hierarchical power structures in the room, how do they exist? How is there a director, and how do the performers work with the director, and what kind of rehearsal hours do you have? We're thinking about that. We're thinking about holistic ways of making theater. So that's like one thing. The other thing is that what we do is we create new work. So we sometimes commission artists to write new plays. Other times, we just produce new plays that we develop maybe a little bit, but we meet the artist at a point in their development where they're closer to production. And also we revive like what we want to call like queer classics. Like for example, Lilies that we did. Or Jean Genet. We did some Jean Genet at the beginning of this whole lifespan of lemonTree. So it's sort of a combination of both. When we're reviving queer classics, we're looking at it from the lens of like, why are we doing this now? What's the point of doing Lilies at this day and age? And when we're looking at new work, we're really kind of bouncing off of from the queer classes, kind of going, what was not answered from this work? Like with Bodied Politic, for example, we were doing Jean Genet, and we were talking about queer life, back in the day when Jean Genet was around. And we started thinking about what queer life was like in Toronto at the time. And so then we created Still Life as kind of a direct result to that question of like, what does it mean to be queer? I mean, it's such a big question. We tried to answer it, I think we did the best we could. I'm not sure that it fully answered the question of what does it mean to be queer in Toronto at that time when we created it. But, we're constantly, I think, navigating work by questioning the work that we're currently doing. It's like, oh, we're doing this play. It's answering this question. What does it not answer? Okay, maybe there's another artist who can delve into that.
Right, right. Now, you mentioned about the way that you're constructing the room, the power structures, and who's in the room, and all of that sort of thing. I think that's something that is not particularly common. I think in sometimes in indie theater and in some places we're talking a lot about the room and what the rehearsal hall should look like. But there's a whole history of the way that rehearsal halls have been run, where the director is the be all and end all,
God.
to the detriment sometimes of the people in the cast. There have been abuses and things like that. So the question of how the room works is one that is important. So is this something that you have that lemonTree has always examined, or is that a relatively recent thing that you've brought to the rehearsal hall?
It's a relatively new, I wouldn't say relatively new, but it's not something that's always existed. Like I said, and it started because I needed a name on an application. I think it evolved with time. I think it took the first 5 years was just us doing kind of like everything. We were doing fringe, summer works, shows in basements. Another friend of ours was like, "Hey, can you produce our show?" We're like, "Yeah, let's do it." So there was really no mandate. There wasn't really any sort of deep thinking about it. Yeah, so in the last, we've been around for, was it 12 years now? I say in the last 7 years, we've been more intentional in terms of what we're exploring, and constantly evolving that, in terms of, the idea of decolonizing the room, decolonizing the work. Like that's probably more in the sort of latter part of our existence. And I think that's what we love about it, that we can continue to grow and investigate and, make the creative process better, So yeah, I would say that's a new thing.
Awesome. Now, one of the things that I notice in your bio is that you're part of a dance company called Corpus.
Yeah.
Has dance always been a thing for you, or is that something that you came to later?
No, I'm primarily like, you could say that I'm a dancer. Like I trained as a dancer. I was 5 years old when I started dancing. I trained back home in Albanian folk dance and, what ballet and what we call here jazz, but we call this something different there. When I moved here, I was 15. And so I pursued that a bit more. I continued to dance, but, I don't know if you know anything about the dance world. By the time you're 15, you're a little too old, to pursue it professionally.
Right.
But it wasn't that, like, I back home, I'm, my family, yeah, I was presented with the opportunity to pursue it as a career, and I didn't go to the, what we have here, the National Ballet School. There we have the same thing. So, by the time I was 15, I was kind of like, I don't know, like I'm not going in the route of a professional dancer, right? Like I could have gone to, let's say, post-secondary school and stuff, but I didn't go to National Ballet. And so back in the day, I was thinking, like, if you're not doing ballet, like you're not really dancing, right? Which was very limiting, but that's the school I came from, And but when I got here, I was very lucky. I had an amazing drama teacher. His name is Teodoro Dragonieri, and he's still around. He's an amazing artist, and I just like he made me fall in love with theater. And it was just it was such an automatic kind of transition for me, because I knew I wanted to do something with live performance. So I was like, oh, maybe I should just try this whole theater thing. And I was a new immigrant. It helped a lot with learning the language and the culture as well. And because now I had to deal with text, which was such a huge challenge for me.
Mhm.
And so, I stopped dancing, I guess I would say, probably around that time, and got right into theater. I took theater more seriously.
Yeah. You were like a teenager at that point?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, at what point did you figure out that theater was a thing that you were going to like do, that was going to be your life?
Oh, I would say like the moment I started drama classes with Mr. Dragonieri, with Mr. Drag. I was like, this is it. Like, this is awesome. I can do this. And I remember from the get-go, actually, when I think back, that what I loved the most was not necessarily being on stage. I loved directing and getting involved from that perspective. But because I was a dancer, I also had this like weird kind of like sense of competition, like, like, I know I want to be on stage, like, because that's, like, I find like a lot of young emerging performers at kind of theater schools or any institutions where they've trained, there's this sense that they have to be performers, like that for some reason all the other positions in the theater that we have are like less than, like the sort of being a performer is the most sought after, or at least that's like my sense. I could be completely wrong about this. But I remember thinking that I wanted to perform because it felt like I should be a performer,
That's a really interesting thing, because I know, and I've talked to a few people who they sort of tell the story of like going to theater school thinking that were going to be a performer because they thought that's what you did. You had to. And then they did like a directing class and they were like, oh, now that I like. And they sort of like shifted to that, or they did a writing class and they found that was something they navigated to more. It's
Yeah.
interesting that so many, I think, of us go into the theater school world and go down that route, because that's the thing that I think we think that's what theater is. We don't.
Correct.
When I was in high school,
I would,
there's no way that I thought that it was anything else. It was like theater
right.
is being an
Of course.
actor.
Yeah. And I would add that it's not even that's what theater is. That's what success means, right? That you are an actor, and you can people define it in different ways. Some people define actor by being at Stratford. Some others define it by being in movies and film and TV. But regardless, that felt to me like, my success as a human being meant that I needed to be successful as an actor. And then me trying out all the other things like that I was really good at, like writing or choreographing or directing or producing. I was really good at producing, that for some reason that meant that I was no longer now an actor, and that I was no longer a good actor, that I'd sort of failed. And so it took me a long time to get to a place where I was like, you know what, can you swear on this podcast? Because
fuck yeah.
I was like, that's fucked up. Like, that's completely fucked up, and I was like, I'm really good at all these things and I enjoy doing all these things. So why can one person not be a producer and an actor when I want to, and a writer or a choreographer, all those things, right? Like, you should be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that doing all of those things makes you better at all of the things, right? If you're a director and you're an actor, you're a better director because you've been an actor, and vice versa. The same with being a writer, the same with being a producer. You have this incredible understanding of all of the things that go into it. So it just makes you better at each of the things that you're doing.
Correct. Yeah. And there's something to be said, like, I don't want to put, like, there is something to be said about the idea that, you dedicate yourself to that one thing and you sort of master it. There's a lot of people that are very good at that. Some people are amazing directors and they have no interest in being on stage. And there are some people that are amazing performers and they have no interest in doing anything else. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also think that equally to that, you can also be an amazing director and producer. You just have to learn how to do all those things and learn how you're going to navigate that. Because I think sometimes the problem is that you end up in the industry we're at right now is a lot of young artists end up doing these things because they have to. They end up producing because they have to. And then what they really want to do is write, or what they really want to do is be on stage. And so they are kind of like shitty producers and then shitty writers. And so they've written a play and they're producing it themselves in kind of shitty ways, but because they want to be on stage. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's what is not good, is when you're doing something because you have to. But if you really want to and you want to do it well, there are ways that you can do all these things. Like, I know my limit of these hyphenates, right? Like, I cannot do more than 2 hyphenates in one project. And there's certain combinations of these hyphenates that cannot live like, if I'm going to perform, I'm not doing any of the other things.
Yeah.
like don't talk to me, because I need to, like, I'm a weird performer. I have a lot of like anxiety and I need a lot of space and stuff like that. But, I can very easily write and direct, like combinations like that, or I could write and produce. Like, there's a lot of artists who do that. Donna Michelle St. Bernard is one person I can think of that have the capacity to write, and focus on that. And then they shift and they become the producer. And they love both,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the worst combinations is that dreaded actor director.
Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be done though. There are people that can do it. It's very rare that I see like a show where I see an actor director where the show that where clearly like the person who's doing has doing one thing better than the other.
Yeah.
It's very clear that, oh God, like you didn't direct yourself here at all. You're just sort of running around.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think there's only one way that can work, and that is that the person who is the director, who's also the actor, has to be able to give up enough of their ego as the director to have an assistant director direct them and give that person empower that person to give them the kind of feedback that a director would give. But
Yeah.
that's a rare thing to find somebody who can drop the ego like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like there are ways. If we're thinking of the creative process in sort of other ways that exists, like what if you do have a group of people that are directing it? Like what if
Mhm.
you don't call it directing, call it outside eyes, call
Yeah.
it collaborators or outside collaborators, however you want to sort of frame it. But it's essentially, the theater, the beauty of theater is that it's live performance and it's your body and it's your spirit and it's your presence. And so you absolutely require somebody on the outside to tell you what it looks like on the outside, because it's a different experience. And that's what you're doing it for. You're doing it
Mhm.
for the audience to come see. It's very
Yeah.
different than when you're doing film. You can probably direct yourself because you can go back and see it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's the main difference is you often see an actor who directs and they can do that successfully on film because you can like you say immediately go and watch the playback and see
yeah,
if it was good or not.
yeah. I would be like, and also for me personally, like I just don't have that kind of confidence as an
Yeah, no.
artist, to kind of, because it's two pretty big roles, right? To just kind of have that kind of confidence. And you're like, I'm killing it. I'm doing it really well on both sides, So
Yeah.
usually
I
my experience is like, oh God, everything sucks,
Yeah. Yeah. I have found it and I got some great advice when I started writing and performing my own stuff. And the great advice that people who had more experience in that than me gave me was the fact that you should, as the writer, choose a point after which you are no longer writing.
Yeah.
Because I know people and they said, I didn't do that. And I spent the time while I should have been rehearsing, still
Right.
rewriting.
The piece,
And
yeah.
it's so to their detriment, to the
Correct. Yeah.
detriment of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, I often say, I just say, like, the writer is not in the room, and if you need the writer in the room, then we're gonna say the writer is in the room, and then I can be in the room as the writer.
Hmm.
But I would never. I did that once with the first play where I performed and I wrote the play, and that was the last time I will ever do that. Even with the last play I wrote, I had to step in as one of the dancers,
Mm,
but very last minute because we had a small injury. But I would never step on stage as a
mm,
performer if it's something that I wrote.
mm. It's very difficult to do, and you have to be able to like you literally have to be able to send the writer out of the room and trust the director
Yeah.
to be now
Can't
interpret the work. Yeah.
Totally. And for me personally, I can't hear the play. I can't. I'm unable to actually hear the full play because I'm constantly concerned with like my intentions as an actor, right? So I'm not
Hmm.
necessarily hearing the rhythm of the whole play, and so I can't. It's very hard for me to do that. I think some
Hmm.
people can.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you have like writer performers like Daniel McIver, amazing, like incredible. So he's got a system, I'm sure. I have never worked with him. I don't know what that system is, but it definitely works. He's got some good
That
plays.
for sure. For sure. Speaking of great plays, Theatre Passe Muraille is you are the artistic producer at Theatre Passe Muraille. How long have you been with Theatre Passe Muraille?
I've been with Theatre Passe Muraille for about 3 years now. Yeah, 2019 is when I started. Originally, I took over. At the time, there was Jiv Parisram was the associate artistic director, and he moved on to become the artistic director at Rumble Theatre in Vancouver. and he asked me to come and take on one of the projects that they had going on at the time, which was the accessibility labs. I was doing some accessibility work at Cahoots Theater as the associate there, and so it was just beautiful transition for me, something I really cared about, beautiful, like really awesome project they had going on. So I took over sort of freelance for that project. Very soon after that, Marjorie, who's one of my mentors and a friend, she moved on and she became the AD at Theatre Passe Muraille. And she asked me, she said, well, do you want to come here as the associate artistic director? I need one here. And I thought, oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful. I loved working with her, and I wanted to continue growing with her. And this was a much larger venue, a lot of history, and also working with like independent artists, young independent artists. I just, totally right up my alley. And then things just sort of progressed from there. At that point, I think the pandemic happened. That thing that shall not be mentioned, and eventually Regine left, and I was asked to step in as the interim for a bit while the company was figuring itself out. At that time, we were really, I was brought into the conversation about the restructuring. They were reconsidering what leadership looks like, especially for Theatre Passe Muraille, a company that's founded by collective creation and collective ways of thinking from a group of very avant-garde artists from a college, and they did a lot of, naked plays high on weed, like it's got some very alternative roots, and so it made sense. And I love that Marjorie was returning the company to its very alternative ways of thinking. And so what does that mean in terms of leadership? Well, maybe it's not a sort of this hierarchy of just an artistic director and a managing director. Maybe there's 3 people running it. And so it was great to be a part of that rethinking. And now I'm sitting in the role of the artistic producer with a new managing director on board, and Marjorie is the artistic director.
When you, I mean, we don't like to talk about the pandemic, but you kind of have to, because you started the role in 2019.
Yes.
Anytime somebody says they started something in 2019, my heart drops, because it's like you start and you go into 2020 with all of the ideas and everything else, and then it all sort of falls apart.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I think that the pandemic did do is force us into a position where we are looking at different ways that theater can be produced, can be experienced, and things like that. I know that's something that you are also interested in. Is that something that has been fueled by the pandemic, or is that something that existed before for you? And what does that mean to you?
I think I've always had sort of the spirit of wanting to reinvestigate things, for sure. But I think the pandemic enhanced that, because it became very clear to not just me, I think to all of us, that the theater was in the middle of an identity crisis. As a medium, like, what the hell are we doing? Like, who's coming to the theater anymore? And why do people come to the theater? What kind of theater are we making? We're still making theater that is of a certain era and of a certain understanding of what theater should be like. So now that the pandemic is happening and people can leave their homes, and people clearly are obsessed with film and TV even more so than they were in the past, it literally has become their sort of way of surviving. People were watching so much TV and film. And we were kind of like, the thing that we had pushed against from was technology. Because we were kind of, well, we don't do film. That's not our thing. We're theater. So much so that even our unions and our regulation is literally like, dividing the two worlds, right? Like drastically dividing. So suddenly we're doing digital art, and what does that mean? So for me, I think the pandemic made me go, yeah, like, what are the ways in which we can make theater that can be different than what it looks like right now, and maybe can address, most importantly, this question around our identity. Like, what is the kind of theater people will, get out of their homes, buy a ticket, and come to the show? Because the sense I get these days is that most people will come to a show maybe once a year. And when I say most people, I don't mean artists, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
engineers and accountants and people who didn't do drama in
Mhm.
high school or in college, people who actually have the financial capacity to pay $50 for a show and come see a play. Why are they not come to the play at once a month?
Mhm.
Once a month. Like, I can see that they're bored at home. They've seen all the movies, they've seen all the TV shows, they've gone to the restaurants. They want variety. And so you can see the moment, like Blogtio posts about something wild going on, people are going to it because people want to go somewhere. But why are they not coming to the theater? And it's affordable. Some shows are 20. Every theater company in the city has a way for you to get a cheap price. If you're under 30, you can probably get like $25 tickets or even less for some of them. I have friends of mine who I was like, do you can go to the National Ballet for $29?
Mm.
You can go to, and they were like, what? I didn't know that. Like, it's not that they don't know it. It's not that the information isn't there. It's that it's not part of our cultural sort of upbringing, or it's not part of our culture. We don't talk about it. We don't do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know that I have the answer, but it's certainly where I'm at right now. I'm asking these questions. The answers I've gotten when I ask people is to say, well, it's too limiting. It's really dark in there. The seats are really close. I'm asked not to use my phone, which is so annoying. Which these are fair. Like, initially you're like, oh, come on, but they're legitimate things, right? Like, those are the things that we like about theater. We like that it's dark, and we like that it's, we're squished and we're just going to see magic on stage. But a lot of people don't come because it's too high risk. They can't leave if they don't like it. They can pay $12 to go see a movie, and if they hate it, they just walk out.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And I think that sometimes, I mean, you bring up movies, so movies are dark, and people don't use their phones in the movie. At least they shouldn't. Everybody gets mad if they do. There's always that one person, though. But I think there's the difference in, like, so some people, they don't go to Theatre Passe Muraille, Factory, Tarragon. They will go to the big Mervish production. And,
again, because it's lower risk, right? Like, they know they're going to pay that $50 and it's going to be a great musical, and they can leave whenever they want.
Yeah,
right? Like,
for sure. I mean, it's still like, yeah, sure, they could leave whenever they want. It's still like everybody does watch you leave in that big theater if you get up and leave. But there is an intermission, and you can sneak out at that point.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I wonder, because I think that we're a culture now that really is looking at, like, people are going to experiences. They're going to the immersive Van Gogh experience.
Oh yeah,
things like
which
that,
is
right?
literally a projection show. Right?
Yes, it is literally a projection show.
Theater's been doing that. We've been doing anyway, yeah.
But the question is, like, how do we get people to come to that? I think we've done ourselves disservices in the past, because there's lots of times when, people go to see a show and they didn't get it, or they didn't like it, and that becomes their whole experience of theater. Right. I went to a play once and I didn't like it, so I'm not going to go again. Also, we don't, I mean, let's face it. I've seen enough shows that are like, you walk in, there's the living room set up, and you're like, okay, so this is
God. Yeah.
Right. And, those have their place. But when you see, like, after, like, going to, like, you've seen 5 in a row, the living room set up, you're kind of like, I'm a little bored with that. So it's like one of those questions, like, what do we do to let people know that how do we share the experience with them?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is that I totally agree with you. And I think, I don't know that I have the answer to that, but there are ways that we can at least try some things. That's where I'm at right now. It's like we have to start trying to do things a bit differently. And so whether it is like part of it, I think that we don't run our plays long enough because we cannot.
Yeah.
It's too expensive. When you think about the Van Gogh experience that you're referring to, they ran that for a long time. So because word of mouth got out, people, so then suddenly you start seeing the flock of people coming. By the time word of mouth gets out for plays in Toronto, it's going to close. It's closed already because it's not running long enough. I think in Toronto, the only one I know that runs plays long is probably Tkarón, right? Or a bit longer than the others. And even that, it's probably like 4 weeks, maybe. I don't know that that's enough time for the word to spread out. I've noticed that that's a thing. The other thing is that we don't have the marketing ability. Like it comes down to money. Like in order for us to really invest in letting people know that this exciting, cool thing is happening. Especially a lot of cool stuff that happens in Toronto is like at the indie level, right? Like that kind of, you see these plays and they're amazing, and we hear about it because we're in the industry, so the word spreads like fire. And a lot of my friends, that's what they say. They say, well, I tell them, go see this, go see it now, But for the larger population, where are they going to find out about it? I mean, people don't pick up Now Magazine anymore and look at the listings, right?
Well, there is no Now Magazine to pick up anymore.
Now Magazine anymore. I know, sad, so sad.
And we've lost almost all of our media coverage as far as theater goes.
Correct.
Globe and Mail still is maybe the only newspaper that has a full-time reporter covering the theater, but they don't really cover indie.
Yeah.
And they don't, so they're like covering things on a certain level. Everybody else is sort of like hiring a freelancer now and then. So maybe you see reviews, but the coverage is not there. Not even Blog TO that's telling everybody about there's a sunflower field and everybody rushes to the sunflower field to take pictures and crowds it and ruins it. But they won't talk, like they're not covering theater at all.
No. Yeah, it's very difficult. So you can see all the barriers that and it's not just theater, dance, live performance as sort of more, mid-sized to indie level, right? Like it's very difficult. We do have people who still go to the theater and they've always gone to the theater, and you're always going to have that group of people that always come, I think. But to, break through this level where we're at right now in terms of the amount of theater that happens to sort of the next level where you're seeing lineups around the corner. Like, I was reading the history of Theatre Passe Muraille, and they were talking about the farm show, and they were talking about how long they ran it in the book. And they were talking about how there was lineups around the corner for the show. Like they couldn't sell it fast enough. Like they were just constantly selling tickets, In my entire career in this industry, I think I can think of like one show that's had that kind of experience where literally you're selling tickets like crazy.
Yeah.
At some point there's just a finite number of people that come see stuff here. Yeah.
I remember I did a show years ago with a theater company that I was part of. We did a play in the style of a silent film. And I remember back in those days, my old theater school acting teacher came to the show. And at the time he saw it and he left and he said, well, if this was a real city, this would never close. And I was like, at the time I was like, what does he even mean by that? Yeah. But then I realized that what he meant was like in a city like New York or London, it would run and it would run and it would run. And somebody would say, oh, bring this to the theater. We'll run it in perpetuity because there's so many theaters there that can do it. The capitalist thing and all that sort of thing. And that kind of thing never happens here. And it's sort of, we're not set up to be able to do that kind of thing.
And so that's why it's like, but what we do have is creativity, we have imagination. And so I think we just have to stop regurgitating the same kind of, stuff. Like even with the young people, I really encourage them. I'm like, please do not do any more David Mamet. Like, it's such a like, oh, I want to act. I'm going to do a David Mamet play. I'm like, let's do something different. Like push the boundaries, like get people off the chairs. There's, during the pandemic, there was these pictures of, because they were talking about social distancing, and they posted these pictures of seats being removed from the theater, and people were like, oh, it's so sad. And I was like, you know what, that's kind of cool. Like maybe this is what we need to remove these damn seats and see what else we can do inside this space that might open our sort of minds and imaginations. Maybe we can rethink the way that we're making things so that we're maybe creating, like people are paying really good money to go see things in 3D. And I'm like, theater is 3D. So, let's use that. Let's use people. I think people do want to get off their couches and go somewhere and have like an experience, like a 360 kind of experience.
Yeah.
I don't think people want to sit and watch something. I think people want to stand or lie on the ground or be sort of thrown into something, so a lot of this a lot of work, it's happening here, like Outside the March does a lot of this amazing kind of immersive kind of work. Daniele Bartolini is another director I can think of who's doing a lot of that kind of work. But I think there could be more of that, where inside the theater, you're not necessarily being asked to do the thing that you've always been asked to do. Maybe now you're being asked to stand and open a drawer and, I don't know, follow some storyline that way. And then you can maybe sit somewhere and listen to something, like, I don't really know. We're playing with that a little bit at Theatre Passe Muraille now. So we have a show coming up in our season called Miriam's World, which is a lot of people might say it's an exhibition, right? But to us, it's an experience. We're trying the idea of bringing people inside the main space so that they can move around it, right? Like they don't have to necessarily, they can sit if they want to. There are chairs there and they can stay for as long as they want, but they can also just sort of sift through it. It's up to them. It's their decision to make what kind of experience they want to have inside. But it is a different way than, coming and sitting and going to intermission, that kind of, there's a beauty to it for sure in terms of the way theater is always made, what you can expect. But I am investigating, or I'm curious about other forms of experiences, theatrical experiences that we can have inside our spaces.
Years ago, I saw, many years ago, I was in high school at the time, I saw a show at the Canadian Stage. It was called Donut City, and it was completely completely immersive. So scenes could take place behind you or in front of you or over here. Like you were in the space and it just happened around you. And that kind of experience of like not knowing like where the next scene is going to happen it really jolted you out of like any kind of complacency. You're like, this is not what I was expecting, because it was very exciting to have it just happening right there.
It's visceral, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying. I saw another show like that at a theater center. I think Theater Center was doing a lot of amazing work, and I think it was called This Is How We Got Here, but I could be completely making that up. So do not quote me on this. I apologize. But it's a beautiful dance show. Oh God, I don't remember the names, but anyway, beautiful show. And same idea. They asked you to take your shoes off, and it's one of those shows that I think if Theater Center had the financial capacity to really market it, to really say, hey, this is what's going on. This is super cool. Do not miss this. I think people would flock to it just like they would at a sunflower field to take pictures, because inside of it, it's visceral. Like you could sit very close to the performance. You can feel them moving. The lights are doing a thing on you. The music is just moving through you. I think people want those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To leave the theater world for a moment, as one podcaster to another.
Yes.
Tell me about your dating podcast.
Oh, yes. So fun. This was a pandemic sort of love affair for, that period of time where we were like, hey, maybe we should do something else and, have fun with something else. A friend of mine really wanted us to start a podcast together. She'd been talking about it way before the pandemic. And I'd always sort of been like, I don't know. That's not my thing, And of course the pandemic happened and like everybody became a podcaster,
Right.
It's like, ooh, yeah, microphone and I can do this. And so did we. We decided, okay, let's do this. This is time. And I really wanted to do something that was just fun. I didn't want to do another podcast where you're just talking, like I was like, I don't really have much to say, like I'm not that smart. So I was like, I don't know that we need to like, find a podcast where we're talking to each other about things, but So yeah, for some reason the dating idea came, about, and we're like, oh, you know what? We don't have like a dating. I'm obsessed with the reality TV show, like dating reality TV shows. So I was watching a lot of that, and I was like, I would totally listen to a dating podcast if there was one. So that's where the idea came from, and we ran it for a bit until when it became a little bit too difficult to run. So now it's just sort of in limbo, like in sort of, should we continue it? Should we not continue it? We're still thinking about it.
Like, did you follow a couple on a date?
So the show essentially, no, what we do is we bring on, it's a game show. So we bring a single of the week, and then we introduce that single of the week to 3 eligible other singles. And over the course of the episode, we play a whole bunch of games. And at the end of that, we say, who would you rather? Who would you rather go on a date with? So they get to pick, they haven't met this, but like they don't see each other at all. It's this completely blind date. But what they do get to do is they get to play these games with them. They get to hear their voice, and they get to ask them questions, and vice versa. Right. So it's super fun. And, I think it's also, for me, it was sort of the obsession with dating apps have turned the dating world into this sort of superficial, like swiping left or right. And so you're basically making a decision whether somebody's the right match for you based on just like a 2-dimensional picture, and, we've forgotten about the 3-dimensionality that we have and how we turned on we might be by somebody that you might not necessarily swipe right on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in a way, the show was responding to that exhaustion around, a visual based kind of dating to something that's more auditory. So then you get a sense of them, you really get to hear them. People responded really well. They loved the idea. A lot of people that we had on our show were kind of like, oh, this is amazing. Can I always date like this? Yeah, so that's essentially the show. And then at the end of that, they get to go on a date together. But because it was a pandemic, some of the dates were outside and they were in a park. And, that was completely between the two of them. Like,
sure, yeah.
But some of them were on Zoom, in fact. And so it was super fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, the whole dating thing is I like the idea, the whole swiping thing has made dating feel like a catalog. And so
Exactly.
you're like always searching Amazon for, well, I found this, but is there like something like, this is fine for now, but is there something better? Which is so like, when I was,
it's wrong.
When I was dating, thankfully I'm not anymore, but like when I was out doing that, it was all so very, you'd be talking to somebody, and then they would sort of like, you get the sense that they're just sort of waiting. Like I'm entertaining them for now until something else comes along. And it's just so frustrating.
Yeah. It feels, and that's what it feels like. It feels like people are just constantly distracted.
Yeah, for sure.
There's this constant distraction. And the thing is, when you start dating at the beginning, you can be very easily distracted.
Yeah.
And it's almost like people are too available. It's like, you're just like, I had a kind of okay date. We won't even give people a second chance because we're like, it was okay. And like, it was fine, but it was okay. And so you're like, I'm just going to go on the dating app and swipe again, because, I'm playing I heard this other podcast, I think, that was talking about dating in today's world. And it's really set up in a way that it makes you want to go back, because what the apps want is for you to continuously be single.
Yes.
Continuously play the game. They don't want people to match up. I mean, let's be honest here, right? And so that's what they're selling to you. So they want you to match. But what they want is for you to just kind of like play the roulette game, like again, right? And so there are other ways to rethink, I think, dating. And again, so this is me rethinking things. Like I was like, how do I break the structure of dating in today's world? But the podcast was certainly one of the attempts. But
nice.
And I'm not sure it's something that you can sustain for a long period of time.
It's so, I mean, there's a lot of work involved in that kind of thing, right? Like you have to,
you're not getting paid,
exactly.
Like it's like just casting alone is hours and hours and hours of work. And, eventually we were like, this is super fun. We're having a great time. But at this point, it's turned into a lot of work and not good times.
Well, that's the problem is,
Yeah.
you know, almost nobody's making money from podcasts. And
Yeah.
news flash to anybody listening. But
And
like
how long you been doing it for?
6 years.
Good for you.
Yeah. I must be getting something out of it.
Yeah.
But it's not money. But it's there, you have to keep it at a level where it's doable for you and you're still enjoying it.
Yeah.
That's sort of the necessary thing. And if it's taking more time or it's no longer enjoyable, you got to let it go.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. It's not worth it,
No.
And I think that's where we're at right now. We're kind of like, that's why we're not fully letting it go. The podcast is available. People can listen to it. It's called Who Would You Rather? You can find it everywhere. But for us, we're saying we'll pick it up again when it's time for us to have fun again. Like, for a while we're like, what are we going to do? Our listeners were like, we can do whatever we want. Like, nobody's not sleeping at night because we haven't released an episode, like it doesn't matter.
There you go.
So I think when we started to look at it from that perspective, that it's like, this is something that we can do because we're enjoying our time together. The other two hosts and producers are friends of mine. So we're like, we're going to pick it up again when it's time. At this point, we have other things that are keeping us busy.
It's always the kind of thing where you like, much like, your project-based theater company, it's something you can just sort of like go to. You could do a special episode and there it would be,
Exactly.
it can be whatever and whenever you need it to be.
I agree. Yeah.
In terms of like exploring theater and live performance and how it can be experienced better. I mean, podcasting, I experimented with some audio drama, things like that while the pandemic was on. There's all kinds of different ways that companies have sort of flirted with continuing to produce, and video has been one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Theatre Passe Muraille, were there any attempts at putting anything out as a live stream or a live performance over video?
Yeah, I think for us, it became important that we wanted to continue. Like you said, we started in 2019. Marjorie's like the 2019, 2020 season was a season that was already programmed by the previous artistic director, Andy McCann. So the 2021, which is the peak of the pandemic, was Marjorie's first season of programming, right? And in a way mine as well, because I was the associate. And so we were both very excited about the programming we put in place. And sadly, we saw all the shows kind of have to move to a different way of thinking. And so we weren't going to just let it go. And we worked with a lot of artists that wanted to explore what digital theater meant. And for us, what we discovered was one of the core values at TPM is our desire to be an inclusive theater company. So we're really thinking about accessibility initiatives, at the forefront of everything that we do. And we found that actually providing digital ways of experiencing theater actually fulfilled an accessibility need, that there are individuals who are not actually able to leave their homes and they want to actually have theatrical experiences. So, for us right now, this is something that's going to remain. Digital work is going to remain in our season. We have some this year as well. We did a lot of live streaming last year. We did all sorts of kind of live streaming from, very simple stuff like development things. We did a piece with Luke Reese, for example. And that's in development, where the camera just follows him around the space as he's telling his story. And then other pieces like my play, which is called Toka, where it was, a multi-camera, essentially film shoot, and it's pre-recorded and beautifully edited, and then it gets live streamed for specific times to the audiences. But it is a pre-recording of a theatrical experience, but it's really using the capacity and beauty of film to its full extent, right? Like the close-ups, right? Like film has so much power with close-ups. We don't have that in theater, right?
Yeah.
We have sort of magnitude in theater, sort of a big lighting, big set kind of idea. So we played with that a lot, and we're going to continue playing right now. We have a show called Okay, You Can Stop Now, which is a dance piece by Shaquille Rollock. And with that one, he's investigating what the media or the perception of stories and people's lives through the media, especially on POC and Black bodies. The ways in which a story gets sort of twisted or told in a different way, and how it's get framed or contextualized in a way that it makes one seem guilty or not guilty, right? In certain circumstances. And in today's age, we have these phones that we just pull out. We're like, oh, there, I recorded it, And then we were just like, this is proof. And you're like, but is it proof? Because maybe somebody just recorded a very small section to it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it is actual proof. Like, they've captured, the situation. The reason that we responded the way we did to George Floyd is because we saw it. For a lot of people, they were like, this is what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And for a lot of other people, it was like, I cannot believe that this is what's been going on, right? There's this sort of like this, but people responded to that because of that recording, the ability of these little things, the technology. And so he's really investigating that through dance. And what we're going to do is we're going to live stream it through different cameras for the performers are manipulating. So you, as an audience, can come and watch it, and you'll see different kinds of cameras capturing these different moments. So you'll be able to see different sort of sections to things. And so we're playing on that idea of what the power of these phones or video capture can be, and how it can actually support and make us, make this a better society. And sometimes it can, screw us over.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really glad to hear that Theatre Passe Muraille is continuing with the video, because I've been saying for a while that it opens accessibility doors, not just the accessibility door of for people who can't leave their house, but also for people who maybe can't get to the theater, whether they live far away from the theater, or even a night of going out to the theater is too much because of you have to get dinner and you have to do this, that, and the other thing. And I think it opens up so much. And there are so few theaters who I think are still committed to the video, because there's ACTRA and equity, and they all want their piece, right? And that becomes a problem that I hope eventually they'll come to some kind of accommodation. But part of the skeptic in me thinks that they will just keep the status quo. But I think it's so important to keep doing it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that's definitely what we'll be doing. I know that there are other theaters that are thinking the same. We've partnered with the Culture in Vancouver, and they're doing a whole digital series. So they're going to do digital presentations. They're presenting one of our pieces, which is the Euro the Cello, that's going on right now at Theatre Passe Muraille. You can come see it in person, but it also will be an auditory experience. So you can come, experience it. We haven't released the dates, but it's going to be something that you can also experience auditorily. So we're approaching it from different perspectives. Not every project uses video. Some projects might be just auditory experience. Some projects might be you get something sent in the mail. Who the hell knows? Like it varies on what the artist wants to be saying. We always like to put the artist at the center and what they want to say first. And then these other elements, I think, should enhance what you want to say. Like in this case with Shaquille, bringing the video makes total sense. It actually, helps tell the story better. And so that's our approach. And I hope that other theaters do it as well. For me personally, I just love that I can access theater in England or in Italy or in other parts of the world that you wouldn't be able to see stuff because you can't be there physically, right? So now you can.
Yeah. I think it also breaks down the Canadian silo, because, if we're in Toronto, we often don't know what's happening, or we certainly can't see what's happening in Edmonton or in Vancouver and things like that. Sharing the video and making that available, again, it lets us connect
100%.
in this massive country that has all of these like little dots of theater across it. and I think it's so important. I know it's something that the St. John Theatre Company, I did their Fringe Festival, and they
Mhm.
had been doing video through the pandemic, and they even outfitted one of their main spaces with like a 3-camera setup that they could just like run from. And they hadn't intended to do video this year at their Fringe Festival, and they found out their audience was demanding it.
Wow.
And
That's amazing.
so they flipped and they were like, all right, so we're going to offer these digital tickets, and it's not going to be a live stream because that's too much for us to do right now. But they did record each performance, each of the shows, and made it available for a limited amount of time during the
After
Fringe.
or
So
during the show.
during the Fringe, if you couldn't make it out to the theater, you could still see the
Wow.
show.
That's
And
amazing.
I think that kind of thing is so necessary
Yeah, I
to
agree.
yeah. I really hope that it's something we keep exploring.
Yeah, I hope so too as well. I can see that, and not just that, but I hope that it gets, that the technology gets better and better, and that we are able to have even more exciting adventures, from a technological perspective. And I also think that that kind of work goes back to sort of where we started, or the conversation that we had earlier, which was, how do we build better experiences that will bring more audiences? I do think that this will bring more audiences to the theater. We just have to start finding ways to use it so that it doesn't necessarily resemble, a Netflix experience, right? Like,
Right.
because we can't compete with that. We cannot compete
No.
with that.
No. And that's the thing
So
is
let's
like,
try.
I think it's important that we're still doing theater. We're not making films.
Correct.
But like to live stream, and even if you can manage to get like 3 cameras in a space, you can still make it dynamic and you can still make it fun.
Correct. Yes.
And it's all doable because you can all do that live.
Yes.
It's just something that I think is worth exploring, and I commend Theatre Passe Muraille for keeping it going, and I hope more companies try that too.
Thank you, and yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, Indrit, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a ton of fun.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.